This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. All right. Well, my old senior pastor used to tell people, if you show me your friends, I'll show you your future. The Harvard social psychologist David McClelland was probably a little less catchy about it, but he said essentially the same thing. The people that you habitually associate with determine as much as 95% of your success or failure in life. And when we turn to the Bible, we find the same kind of advice there. Proverbs 13:20 says, "Whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm." We're on our third week in a row now diving into the life of Abraham, and we've already looked at what it means to respond with God in faith and how to walk through doubt. And there were a lot of stories, personal and otherwise, there about that last week. Abraham really, like I said, puts meat on the bones of what it means to respond to God with faith, and how to walk through doubt, and what it means for you and I to live through faith. But the truth is, most of our journey doesn't just depend on what we do alone. It also depends on who we surround ourselves by. Who do we take along with us on that journey? If you look at your 5 closest friends, what is your future, your walk with God, going to look like? Now, just for an open illustration here, think about the Lord of the Rings for a second. How many of you have seen the Lord of the Rings? Okay, read the Lord of the Rings? Okay, a few less. Okay, there we go. This book is a literary classic. J.R.R. Tolkien actually invented several languages while he was writing it. So, smart guy. In this story, we've got Frodo Baggins, a simple guy from a small town who it turns out is the only one who can hold on to the One Ring, this object of incredible power and darkness, and actually resist the temptation to use it. And a lot of people over the years have said the ring here represents sin and temptation, so it's a bit of an allegory reflecting Tolkien's background. But there's a dark sorcerer named Sauron who is trying to track down and recover the ring so he can use it to restore his physical body and return in power once again, which would be disaster for the whole world. Sounds like something that would make a good movie. So Frodo is given a mission to bear the burden of carrying the ring all the way across the land into the fiery volcanic depths of Mount Doom. You have to say it just that way. Of Mount Doom, to destroy it forever. But he's just one hobbit. He needs help. So he gets himself a fellowship, a band of brothers, if you will, who join him on a dangerous journey. But here's the thing. Frodo doesn't just pick up any old randoms on the street to join his team. He chooses wisely. He surrounds himself with people who share his vision and his values and his commitment. He's got fighters with him. He's got people with connections that will help him with his journey along the way. He's got loyal friends. He's even got a wizard who knows the history of the ring and of the people who are after it and who can go on and smooth out the path ahead. But not everyone that Frodo is surrounded with is a help to the cause. In the story, Frodo also has 2 friends who join with him without being asked. Merry and Pippin, and they volunteer and get enthusiastic, and they refuse to take no for an answer. And if you read the book or watch the movies, you know it would be a very boring movie without Merry and Pippin, because they get Frodo into trouble all the time. And you see that this couple of guys that just attaches themselves to Frodo, they nearly compromise the mission. Most of the book is filled with Frodo having to escape with his life from the trouble that they always get him into. They're like a walking illustration of the proverb, "A companion of fools suffers harm." So that brings us to our question for today. How do we choose the people that we will be surrounded with? Who will your companions be on the journey of faith? Who gets to speak into your life and influence your family and encourage you with wise counsel and walk with you when you're in a difficult time? Well, Genesis 13 has the answer. As we choose partners for the journey, we're doing something very important. We're deciding who will hold us up, who will challenge us, who will show us things that maybe we don't see on our own, who can illustrate a better way, who can make us aware of what's possible for us and those around us. Choosing who you are going to have around you on the journey of faith is very important. So there's the initial following God that happens. There's journeying through doubt. And yet we share that with other people. We have to decide, who will we gather with? This is part of why we have the church. And Jesus doesn't just save us and say, okay, it's between you and me, but he calls us together as a group of people. He makes us part of something that he's building together. He says you can't do it on your own. You have to do it together. He makes us a family of God. Amen? Amen. And so as we're trying to think through, who will we surround ourselves with? Who will we invite into our lives most closely? Who will we ask to correct us and walk with us? Who will we have be an influence on us and our families? The first thing that we need to do is consider the responsibility. Consider the responsibility. Here's what happens in chapter 13, verses 1 to 4. It says, Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot went with him into the Negeb. Okay. So Abram went, and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot into the Negeb. There's these things that are part of his household, these people that he has a relationship with. He owes them his protection and his love and his care. They are people who've been entrusted to him. Abraham wouldn't be a faithful man without caring for those that God has entrusted into his own household. In verse 2, it says, Now Abram was very rich in livestock and silver and in gold, and he journeyed on from the Negeb, that's the wilderness, as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place where he had made an altar at the first. And there, Abram called upon the name of the Lord. And this phrase right here, called upon, maybe some of your translations would say he prayed in the name of the Lord. Maybe some of your translations would say that he preached in the name of the Lord. Really, the Hebrew word here is to invoke. Invoke the name of the Lord, to speak it out. Could be in prayer, could be in preaching. It could be that he publicly worshipped at that spot. He built an altar, we see. And so he had a responsibility to maybe the area around him to be a witness. God was calling him to a certain area at a certain time, at a certain place. And so the first thing that Abraham does is he considers the responsibility. Who are my people? Whether or not I get along with them, whether or not we like the same things, whether or not this person brings trouble into my life, they're my person. So as we walk with people in our life, as we invite them in, there are certain people that really just have to be part of our life. Whether you enjoy them all the time, whether you agree with them all the time, you're stuck with them. And my wife laughs because she's stuck with me. And so this can be family. Largely it is family. If you get married, and then you decide, you look at your husband or your wife, and you say, you know what, we don't agree on the same things, we don't get along, we don't like the same movies, tough. You're in for this. You're in for this. Now, there are some actually really tragic stories of some people who neglect this kind of relationship. So I saw earlier this week, there's a story of someone was sharing what they called funny trauma. Like a trauma that you carry, but it's kind of a funny story. And this one a girl shared a story about how her dad left her and her family and her 3 other siblings when she was just 4 years old, and went off to go and pursue his career, his dream of being a competitive breakdancer. Right? See, a funny trauma. And you have permission from her to laugh at that. Now, here's the thing. He actually did really good. Like, he did really, really, really good. He was in, like, Jennifer Lopez videos, and he was on Good Morning America, and they wrote news stories about him, and he was out doing all the kinds of things, but he also never paid her medical bills and didn't know when her birthday was. He went out and he pursued his dream, and he did what he always felt like he should do, but he wasn't there for his family. He went and he lived his dream, and he didn't let anyone hold him back or tell him no. He lived his best life now, but he was a horrible father and husband. He neglected the relationships that God called him to and told him, this is part of your responsibility. This is not a thing that you can back away from. As we consider who we journey with, there are certain relationships that we just look at and we say, this is our responsibility. I owe myself to these people. Abram looked out and he said, well, one, I've got myself, right? I have to take care of myself. I have to eat well. I have to make sure that I am fit enough to take care of my family. I have to make sure that I'm learning. So there's the relationship with himself, between himself and God. There's his wife. He has to consider and take care of his wife. Now, him and Sarai, we'll find out later, they didn't always get along, but she's his, and he is hers, and they belong together. And there's a responsibility to that relationship. There's all that he had. Well, this includes not just, like it says later on in this passage, livestock and silver and gold, but there were multiple people who were part of his own household. Like in the next chapter, there's a situation where some people come and they capture Lot and they drag him off 220 kilometers to the north. And Abram goes after them with 300 some people raised in his own household. When he had a camp, it was a whole camp, a group of people. And he's responsible to these people. They are his people. And so there's all that he had. That includes people that maybe he had seen him worshiping in other places where he had set up altars, maybe in Egypt, maybe in Bethel, maybe in Ai, maybe in Hebron, some of these other places where it talks about. Maybe they had seen this strange man off in the middle of the wilderness with this traveling caravan of lots and lots of people and animals and riches and that kind of thing. Maybe they had seen him setting up his altar and came and asked him, what is that altar about? Who is the God that you worship? What do you believe? What do you do again? And maybe they joined themselves with him, as people later would do with Israel from all the nations. Maybe they joined with him and they said, we want to belong to your household. We want to be your people. We want to worship your God. And Abraham had a responsibility to them. He couldn't just cut them loose. And so in our lives, when we're considering those who we journey with, first we consider the responsibility that we have. There's also a thing in the Bible. We look at primarily family. Well, often this is the immediate family. You know what I mean by immediate family? Those who are actually in your house, your husband, your wife, your kids. Genesis 2:24, this is a countercultural teaching in many places, even still today. It says, Genesis 2:24, therefore a man shall leave his mother and father and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. What's the pattern in biblical marriage, biblical families? It's that two people leave their families of origin and they start a new family. And so when Kendra and I got married, my parents did not get a new daughter, and Kendra's parents did not get a new son, but instead Kendra got a husband, and I got a wife, and we raised our children, and they're our children. This is a strange thing because sometimes we think things have to carry over. There's a responsibility for us to have other family members sometimes continue to speak into and shape the lives of even our children. Sometimes even when they're not the healthiest. I'll tell you guys, as a youth pastor, I saw some situations that really were tragic. I was a youth pastor in one particular church that was about 600 people downtown in a city in Saskatchewan called Moose Jaw. And so we had lots of people come from inner city backgrounds. Lots of people who were first generation Christians, that kind of thing. And I watched so many times, and it was hard to watch. I would watch the parents would come out from a certain situation and decide, we want to do things better. We want to serve God. We want to get out of this mess that we inherited, that we grew up in. And they would fight like mad to get out of it. And they actually were doing well. And then they had kids. And they felt an obligation to send the kids away to be with the grandparents and be with the cousins and so many times I saw dysfunction skip a generation, right? Because the parents had fought so hard to get out of a certain situation, and then they sent their kids right back in. And so the question has to be asked, what is our responsibility? Who gets to shape the kids? Who gets to shape the husband and the wife? Who belongs in whose family? See, if we don't have this value of saying that a family is a family, an immediate family is its own family unit, if we don't have this, then oftentimes we are releasing a whole group of people back into places where they just barely escaped from, in situations that really were dark, in places that were not very good, and we're sending them right back and saying, you may have escaped, but now you got to send your kids back in. And it's terrible. I saw so many families that just felt like they had this obligation, and I watched their kids just become like the rest of the family, like the rest of the cousins, like the rest of the in-laws, that kind of thing. And the parents were kind of left holding their heads going, how did we let this happen? And that's how they let it happen. Now there is a responsibility, though, that we owe to our parents, even as grown adults. So 1 Timothy 5, verses 3-8, says, honor widows who are truly widows, but if a widow has children or grandchildren, right? There's a children-grandchildren relationship. Let them first learn to show godliness to their own household and to make some return to their parents, for this is pleasing in the sight of God. And so, while it's true that we form our own family unit, there is a responsibility, considering the responsibility, there is a responsibility to love and care for and give some kind of return, some care, to those who first cared for you. And so how we do that while also taking care of the lines of influence and also remembering that the kids are our kids, that kind of thing, that's the tricky part. And so there's a debt that is owed, an honor that needs to be given, and yet at the same time, we need to say who's within our responsibility, and we have a responsibility to a certain group of people under our care to say they're ours and we're watching out for their best interest. Does this make sense? Okay. Number 2, so we consider the responsibility, then consider the context of the relationship. Here's the context of the relationship that Abram was in. Verses 5-7 say this. So the land could not support both of them dwelling together, for their possessions were so great they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. At that time, the Canaanites and Perizzites were dwelling in the land. Okay, so what do we see here? We see that there was a problem. The land could not support both of them dwelling together. And they could not dwell together. And there was strife. And so this is the situation. They're both dwelling in the same area. Abraham owes a debt of family, of kinship, of care to this person, Lot, who he has brought with him into this land that God has sent to him. And he's looking and he's considering, and although there's this relationship, there's also a context, a situation coming up, a trouble that needs to be addressed. And so there's a practical problem. Verse 6, the land could not support both of them dwelling together. There is maybe just a relationship problem. They just could not dwell together. It just could not really work. And then verse 7, there was strife, which I imagine would have been really painful for Abraham. It is a painful thing to go through a hard relationship with someone that you care deeply for. You want everything to be okay. You want everything to be good. You know that they're a good person. You know that you love them and they love you. And yet at the same time, there can be reasons why there might be some distance that is needed. There might be some rules. Not every relationship is good in every situation and in every time. So someone told me a long time ago that there are different relationships and they have different rules. And so this guy, he put it in kind of a bit of a joke form. He said, so we know this all the time. Different people have different rules. He said, so if you know someone who is an alcoholic, the rule is you don't bring them into a bar with you, right? You could tempt them, right? Into any place that serves alcohol. it could tempt them. And so you have a relationship with them, but there's certain places that you go or do not go together. The guy also made the joke, nor do you bring a friend who's maybe a schizophrenic on a hunting trip with you. That could go bad as well. So just like that's the case, that there are rules for certain relationships, there might be other rules for relationships. So it might be a busy season. There might be someone who their definition of friendship is they can come into your house any hour of the day. You can always meet together and talk for a couple of hours just on the spur of the moment. You've got lots going on. They just don't understand. They feel hurt that you can't meet with them right now. And for a little while, that relationship might need to be put on the back burner because it's just not operable. You might have, there's a couple that you're getting along with, and then each of you has kids, and each of you has different parenting philosophies. So now it's not just your relationship with someone else, but it's also your kid's relationship with their kid. Or whether or not they can come into your house and sort of like tear it up, right? And some people are good with that, and some people are not good with that. Some people have a home that's set up for that, some people don't, and both need to be considered. Maybe there's a different definition of relationship there, or some people say, well, to be a friend means this, and someone else says, well, to be a friend means this. One of my best friends came here a little while ago, a few Sundays ago. And so he came with his wife and his 3 kids. 2 of them are adopted. Just an excellent family. Here's the deal: Greg and I were roommates when we were in college. I've known Greg for longer than Kendra and I have been married. For longer than I've known Kendra. Our relationship goes way back. We even celebrate holidays together. So we have a yearly tradition where we will celebrate New Year's together. Our wives, who are both Dutch, they get together and they cook oliebollen. And it's delicious, and it's a good time. We've celebrated this now in 3 different provinces. We've gotten together for New Year's in Saskatchewan. One time we met up in the middle in Winnipeg in Manitoba, and then we just celebrated recently here in Ontario. So this is a long, extended relationship. The reality is, though, Greg and I have the same definition of what a friendship involves. And so what that means is, I've gone months and months without talking to Greg, right? Like, my wife will tell me about things that Greg is up to, because she's been talking to his wife, and we can both be out of communication with each other for a couple of months and come back together, and it's like no time has passed at all. Do you have a relationship like that? Okay. We've got another friend who their definition of a relationship was constant communication. All of a sudden being over at your place. They lived 5 hours away from us and consistently would refuse to give us any heads up until they were like an hour or a half an hour away from our door, and we'd be, getting everything going. And it just couldn't work out for both of us to get together because what they saw as a need for a relationship, we just couldn't do. We had all kinds of crazy stuff going on in seminary, everything's happening. And so for a season, that relationship took a pause. So you consider the context. Is the relationship workable? Do you both have the same expectations? Can you walk together? Can you encourage each other? Is the situation right? There's some relationships that are only there for a time and for a season, but they can still be good, encouraging, godly relationships. They can still be ones that change your life forever. They can still be ones that maybe you get paused for a little while and picked back up later as the situation changes again. Some of the best friendships I've had have been ones that were there for a little while and then went away, and then you message someone on Facebook again, and it's like you pick back up, and for 2-3 years you're hanging out again. That can happen too. Not every friendship is there all the time in every situation. Some friendships have rules or have seasons to them. We see at the end of this passage that there is a reason why Abram and Lot were having difficulty in their dwelling situation. At that time, for that season, the Canaanites and the Perizzites were dwelling in the land. It made it difficult to find places where both could have a large enough area to graze together. Didn't make either Abram or Lot a bad person. It didn't mean that there wasn't a strong relationship. Actually, in the next chapter, Abram goes on foot 220 kilometers to the north with a group of people and fights a battle against 5 different nations just to get his nephew back because he loves his nephew. So there's a shaping of this relationship, but that doesn't imply that there's no love. Maybe some of you actually have that. Just thinking about this now. Some of you actually have a relationship in your life where there's someone who you really care about and you would do anything for them and you really deeply care about the situation that they're in, but because of your situation in life or because of things going on in theirs, there's temporarily some distance that you've had to have. I just want you to know that doesn't mean that you love them any less. And if someone is in that situation with you, if they're busy for a time, if you've been doubting where you stand with that person, I want you to know that doesn't mean that they love you any less either. Time and situations happen to all of us. God brings different things into our life during different seasons. And sometimes we get swept up with things. Sometimes we have to focus elsewhere for a time. And when that happens, that doesn't mean that the relationship is lost. It just means that there's a season. And so what could you actually do in this season while there's a temporary break? Well, you could pray for that person. God, I don't get to spend the time with them that I would like to, but God, I just pray that you would be with them and you would give them strength and you would help them and you would help them to take care of all of their things that they've got going on. God, I pray that you'd watch over them, you'd protect them. If you're a grandparent, you could pray this for your grandchildren. I know that my grandma prayed often for me, even though we only ever saw each other during the summers. She wasn't big on talking over the phone. And so during the intervening time, I know that she was praying for me. You could maybe even send a gift just to let them know that you still are thinking about them and caring for them. You're not pushing your way back in, but you are thinking of them. And they can receive something and go, that's really helpful. I really needed that during this time. Maybe that can cause them to reach back out. You can just offer to, when it works for their schedule, or both of your schedules together, you can say, let's get together, but let me just hear you out for a little bit. I just want to hear how you're doing. I don't have any kind of agenda. I don't have anything that I want you to agree to. I'm not trying to guilt you about no communication in the last bit. I just want to love you. And sometimes when we do that, we find that the relationship warms up a little. It comes back. The other situation that was maybe taking them away for a bit, well, all of a sudden you're kind of helping them through that situation. And they go, oh, I really need that. Actually, come to think of it, like, I've been having such a hard time. Thank you for being an encouragement here. Thank you for understanding. And that relationship is restored. And so there's just some things that you could do in a given time. But don't lose hope just because there's been a little bit of distance. There's so many things that could explain it. And there's a few things that you could do in the middle of that time. So Abram considers the responsibility. He considers the context. And then he considers the boundaries. So we're gonna start running through pretty quick here. Abram said to Lot, "Let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are kinsmen. Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me." In the Hebrew, actually, he says, "Please separate yourself from me." If I were Lot, I wouldn't know how to take that. "If you take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if you take the right hand, I will go to the left." So he's being very easygoing here. And he's just saying, look, the response is to this situation, this time, there has to be some boundaries, but it doesn't mean a lack of love. It doesn't mean a lack of relationship at all. And so in our different relationships, we can have sometimes people who are, the situation is great. We have all kinds of time to be there. It's wonderful. And sometimes in these different situations, we can have people who operate under a couple of different categories. And so I'm taking this from somebody else, but he talks about people who come down. This is from a series in Proverbs, who come down in categories of, there's a righteous person who is very giving, seeks to do good to you, is wise, gives wise counsel. They're just all around great. They're a benefit. You want them in your life. You wouldn't know what to do without them. They're a blessing to you every time that you're involved with them. There's the righteous person. And then he says there's someone else who's not a bad person, but they're like Merry and Pippin in The Lord of the Rings. They're friendly and they're great to hang out with, but in some ways they're the fool. Now most of us actually are in that situation in one way or another. I don't know about you, but I can't fully see beyond my own biases. I can't. Sometimes I have a bad mental day and I don't know that I'm having it. Sometimes I say a dumb thing, sometimes I don't think. During different categories, I at least can admit to sometimes being the fool. Maybe if the pastor goes ahead, maybe you can admit to sometimes as well. And what happens is, because most of us are foolish in at least some areas, there's some things where we can't see straight. People in relationship with us will sometimes need to build a boundary. Not to say that there's anything that we're doing wrong that's on purpose, but there might just be some area where, okay, like this can't work. Like this part of life, we don't get you involved in. Father-in-law, friendly guy, considers himself to be something of an accountant and always gets involved in your. This is not a real story, by the way. I'm just making this up. So Ken, if you're listening online later this week, it's not you. So let's say your father-in-law considers himself to be something of an accountant and always gets enthusiastic whenever it's bill time and wants to get right involved, and all of a sudden he wants to do your taxes and he's messing them up and it's going crazy and you're pulling your hair out. This is not a personal story. Not a personal story. And you go, okay, I love you. I want to be in a relationship with you. There's many areas where you are important to me and you're a blessing to me, but this isn't one of them. And so you have a boundary there. It doesn't mean that the whole relationship is bad. It just means there's one part or a couple of parts even where some controls just need to be put on for the sake of undue enthusiasm. And then there's someone who falls not in the category of the righteous or the sometimes foolish, which I think is almost all of us, me certainly. But then there's the final category of some people really are wicked. Some people are really out to do you harm. Some people don't want to see you succeed. Some people feel threatened by you doing better than them or making decisions that they wouldn't make or succeeding in areas where they haven't. And this is kind of a well-studied phenomenon where people will have around them people who will sabotage their success in different areas. Sometimes without realizing that they're doing it, but sometimes they do realize. So for example, if you've ever heard of Oprah, Oprah multiple times has dieted, lost a bunch of weight, but she has these stories of when she would do that, her friends would gather around and they would try to push her into eating something that she had already said, like, I don't want to eat this. I don't want to take part in this. I don't want to go out for an extra meal. But whenever she had a success there, they would undermine that success. And there's some people in our lives who, at least in an area or two, are in the category of wicked. You have to consider the boundaries there. You have to make boundaries. You have to say, like Abram said to Lot, please separate yourself from me. You have things that are in your category of things that you take care of. There's your herdsman and there's my herdsman. There's your business and there's my business. I don't want to have strife with you. We're family, but there needs to be a separation. I'll go right, you take the left. You take the right, I'll go left. Let's be at peace, but there has to be some boundaries here. Does this make sense? Okay. And I believe that this is right in the Bible. Abraham illustrates it in his life because relationships are a very important part of what we do. As a youth pastor, I could sometimes predict how well kids would do at following Jesus after the event, the conference, the decision, that kind of thing, because I would see the situation that they were going back into, and I would see how deep their relationships were with however number of people just were against following God. Like not that it was a neutral thing, but they were against. And if we released them into that situation and didn't provide regular, like every week support, every week there's a meeting or two, every week there's something going on, I'm meeting with them as their youth pastor, they're part of the messaging group, like lots of support. If there wasn't that for them, or they weren't able to participate in that, or they chose not to, I would know that we were going to lose them. I would know that we were going to lose them. Because if there's no boundary there, the people who are around you, who have the strongest relationship with you, they control your thought life, they control your spiritual life, they weigh you in a certain direction. And so some relationships you have to tell people, I love you, but for the sake of me and my family, my walk with God, I have to love you, but I also need to build boundaries. That can be a sad thing to do, but it's also just a normal thing. Jesus said in Matthew 10:34-39, don't think that I've come to bring peace to the earth. I haven't come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a person's enemies will be those of his own household. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take his cross, this is the willingness to suffer and do the hard thing. Whoever does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. And Jesus calls us out in the hard place to make the hard decision, to really, really sort through who are we responsible to? What's the context of the relationship? Under what boundaries, under what circumstances would these relationships really work? Okay, really quick case study. There's Abraham and Lot in the land. They both make different kinds of decisions. I know that I'm going over time, by the way. This doesn't happen all the time. Only half the time. Okay. Lot lifted up his eyes and saw the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt in the direction of Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself all the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east. Thus they separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the valley and moved his tent as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. I'm skipping over to verse 18. So Abram moved his tent and came and settled by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. Okay. So Lot lifted up his eyes and saw. So he's guided by what he sees, by how things seem on the surface. And then it says, before the Lord destroyed. So there's a failure to really consider here the where things are going, as he's settling into relationship with these people. Now consider he's moving himself and his family, his daughters, all into one area, and he's going to be fully involved with them. So there's a failure to assess. And then it says, Abram settled in the land of Canaan, and yet Lot settled among the cities of the valley. So in, and there's among. Lot is far more attached than Abram is. Abram goes into an area, but Lot is just fully immersed. In fact, it says that first Lot settled near Sodom and then in it, and then eventually by chapter 19, he's an active citizen and he calls the people there his brothers, and his kids are learning to think like their kids, and that actually leads to a really tragic story. His taste in things is starting to reflect their taste. He's assimilating. He's becoming more like the people around him, and less like who he wants to be. And all the while probably reasoning that he's making an impact and he's reaching out. But he dwells in their city. His kids go to their schools. His daughters are getting engaged to their sons. He's the one learning to follow their customs. And this isn't a sermon against living in the city or sending your kids to public school or anything like that. Don't misunderstand me. There are good reasons to do all these things. But the point is, God has given us the ability to think and to do things, and to know good company from bad company, and to be able to step back from a situation that's not the best and say, am I the one influencing, or am I the one being influenced here? And so Abram makes good choices. He goes and he's a witness But there's there's some healthy boundaries there, and Lot just goes in and plugs right in, and in the end, he ends up. We'll see in chapter 19, he ends up losing his whole family to that situation. It's a really terrible story. We want to be like Abraham, not like Lot. We want to carefully consider our relationships. We want to lift them up to God. We want to say, how is this relationship going to affect me and the people that God has put under my care? How can I follow God best? How can I encourage others? How can I take care of them without allowing maybe some negativity to come the other way? How can I be the influencer and not the influenced? And the result is relationships in the place of God's blessing. The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land that you see I will give to you and to your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth. So if one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring can also be counted. Arise, walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I will give it to you. Here's the thing. God hadn't appeared to Abram since chapter 12. He had taken care of his situation. Abram had been in Egypt. There had been some difficulty, but Abram didn't have any kind of personal relationship with God that we're told about where God revealed himself to Abram. Didn't have any of that since chapter 12. Then Abram looks carefully at his relationships. He cares for this person, his nephew Lot, but he cares for him with some boundaries. And as soon as those boundaries are put in place, it says in verse 14, the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, God came into that relationship. There was blessing and there was peace. So maybe you have a relationship, a friendship that you're hanging on to right now that isn't the healthiest. Maybe you feel like you are obligated to have someone influence you spiritually, influence your family, influence what you think about, influence your finances, influence what your home life looks like. And maybe the place of God's blessing is to say, they might be your responsibility. They might not be, though. They might be your responsibility. Bring in some boundaries. Have this be a place of health. God wants to respond to you and to welcome you in and to lead you into where he is taking you. Where does he want to take you? I just want to end but just by telling you the gospel. Every week, we want to come back to this. God loves you so much that even though he is infinite, even though he is unbound by anything, even though he created the heavens and the earth and everything in them, even though there's nothing that he needs, God came down and he became a man and he pursued you. He did what you and I could not do. He lived the life that we should have lived, and then he died the death that we should have died on the cross in our place for our sins. God is pursuing us and he loves us. And he wants us to come to him. He wants us to respond to him. He knows that if we build our lives on anything else but him, our lives will just fall apart. Whatever we chase and we put in the place of God, that thing will crumble and it will leave us disappointed and it will let us down and it will break us. And God doesn't want that for us. Okay? So God comes to us. He comes down as a man. He lives life as Jesus, and he is revealed to you and to me. And he calls us not just to follow him, but also to call others to follow him, to be a witness to those around us. And so in our relationships, we consider who can we surround ourselves with who will push us on to knowing and loving and serving Jesus and helping others to do the same. And so who has God placed in your life to pray for and to care for? Who has he surrounded you with who could be an encouragement and a help to you? Who is he calling you to pray for right now? Who are the relationships that God has placed in your life? And who are you choosing as partners for the journey? Let me pray and we'll call up the worship team.